thank you for joining us. Today is January 22nd, 2020, and my name is Don Ford, and I'm here with the Progressive Insider, here to discuss a subject that kind of gets left out. We talk about the Green New Deal. We talk about how we want to make the world a better place. We see the actions, but do we really talk enough about environmental justice as a concept? And when you talk about environmental justice, is it possible to discuss it without discussing a new form of racism that's being created as well? Because environmental racism is real, and I think it's something that we aren't talking. We hear about Flint, we hear about things, but until you go there, which I've done, I hope everyone should really see it in the state of turmoil it's in, but you really get to see what's going on. So today we're here, not to talk about Michigan. We're here to talk about Illinois instead, and I'm here with a Dr. Dylan Burdette, who is a PhD. Are you a PhD candidate now, or is that I don't know how that whole
No,
PhD
I'm a PhD.
thing works.
So
you have it.
So that you're a grad student, and then you become a PhD candidate, and then when you graduate, then you're a PhD. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm a graduate.
Congratulations. That's like 4 graduating levels above anything I've ever done. So I graduated from private school once. That was a thing. Does that count? No. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you. So unfortunately, we're getting the laughs in now because, this subject we're talking about today is really no laughing matter. I mean, it really has a direct cost to the quality of life, not just the quality of life, but the direct cost of life. I think that's what our inaction, right? We pay for our inaction in human lives. And I think you're seeing a lot of that firsthand now. Let me get you started just 1 second. You can look up some of the articles that are out. There's an Intercept article that he brought up. It's very powerful. There's also some articles from cleanpowerlakecounty.org. We talk about the ethylene oxide, which in itself sounds like ethyl, little oxygen, maybe the thing. That's not what oxide means, but people don't know any better. And but it's not. It's actually a very scary thing. So let's just get started. We're here to talk about environmental justice and all the things that have gone on. So please take it away, boss.
Okay. So I guess the best way to start talking about environmental justice and environmental injustice is to just kind of tell the story of my family and the story of my life.
So this is a very personal thing that's affecting you. This is a thing.
Yeah.
Very personal.
No, this is they're one of the things that myself and other academics in the environmental justice movement, other scientists have tried to put forward is that it's one thing to talk about about something that's over there. And honestly, usually how we talk about environmental issues or the environment is something that's over there, like either over there's a problem, or over there is land or something that needs to be conserved.
It's just a shortcut for not my problem. That's
exactly.
all that is.
And what environmental justice insists upon is that no, the environment as an issue is something that happens where we live, where we work, and where we spend our time. And this is all the environment, and this is what we need to be focused on. Anyway,
we're all breathing the same air. I mean, and the thing, especially, you don't really think about it until you actually visit. Now, I'm from California, from Los Angeles. So I'm like 6th generation here. So I don't really have a good sense of like, where does my water come from? Where does my stuff go? We don't really think about it. Turn on the faucet, it comes out. It's clean, right? There's no problems. But when you're up near Michigan, and this is something I didn't notice until I traveled up there, was how much of our water comes from just a few sources, the whole country. And it all kind of runs downhill towards the equator. And we're putting all this water at major risk, at a constant. I mean, I don't know a better word for it. It seems like no end.
Yeah. So, and I mean, we'll dig into that kind of as this story progresses. But to start with, so about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, I was accepted into a PhD program at a school in North Chicago, and my wife and I found, a place, an affordable place in a cheap town. I mean, not a cheap town, but it was like a cheap, inexpensive, right? I was a grad student. We needed to find an inexpensive place to live, and so we started our graduate school, or I started my graduate school. My wife was working on her bachelor's degree, and we were doing that for a few years. And then we decided that we wanted to have children. And
which shouldn't be a big thing. I mean, this should be a normal thing that everyone should still be challenging when you're
what you do, right?
Right, exactly.
You get married, you have kids, right? That's what you're supposed to do, right? And so my wife had our first child, and just before she got pregnant with her second child, she was visiting her family. It was a very emotional time, and her family is Guatemalan, and so they were sitting around, they were drinking. She had a drink and ended up in the hospital, and the doctors didn't know why.
Right.
And after that, this was in 2014. After
I've heard it. So it's a reaction to something in her body to the alcohol coming into it, which is a thing of contamination that we've heard in other examples of.
Yeah. So that was the start, but then things started to snowball. Things that she could normally eat, suddenly she couldn't eat. Things that she didn't have allergies to before, suddenly she had allergies to. The doctors could not figure out what the root cause of this was, but they kept telling her there is something happening in your body and your body is not behaving normally.
Right. So this is similar to the intolerance issue that people talk about. Like, I have an intolerance issues for some greens. My wife has it towards sugars. It's all disaccharides a lot of times, double bond sugar molecules. There's a lot of reasons this happens, but generally you can track it to one thing or another. But this was like a plethora of issues that there was no clear
everything all of a sudden. Now the best theory that the doctors had at the time was, well, you have a 2-year-old. You're pregnant right now, so maybe it's just hormones, right?
Right, because it's like manic woman.
Maybe the body is changing.
Yeah.
My wife had her second child, and instead of the health problems getting better, they got worse.
Oh no.
She could only eat maybe like 2 or 3 things, like at all. She could eat apples, and she could eat a few almonds.
And this is while she's actively pregnant, right?
This was after she had a child. She was breastfeeding and looking after a toddler.
Wow.
And
so she had the second child. Now this illness is progressing. It's more thing. There's less things on. Okay, so how does this go? I mean, how is she's alive right now, right? So what happened?
Yes. So she was getting worse and worse, and she lost 80 pounds in about 6 months. Whoa. And her hair was falling out. Whoa. And basically she was dying of starvation, because even when she would eat things, her body couldn't digest them.
Right. So there's wow.
Not only that, but then our children started having these very odd ailments. My children started getting these bizarre skin rashes that just wouldn't heal. My 18-month-old started having seizures, and the doctor had no clue why, and they just stopped.
It's got to be terrifying as a parent. I can't even imagine. I'm a parent. I can't even imagine going through that. Now, you weren't having any symptoms or anything, right?
So I was, my main symptoms were that when I would come home every day, I couldn't breathe. Within 30 minutes of coming into our neighborhood, I could not breathe through my nose. I was going through, I was buying nasal spray in bulk just to be able to breathe.
Well, we see where this is going. I can tell you where this is going. There's an air quality issue, and your kids and your wife are living in it full time. That's got to be terrifying.
Exactly. I got out of the neighborhood, and when I was at work, I was fine. When I would go back to the house, I couldn't breathe. I would start coughing. I would start sneezing, and things were just getting worse and worse and worse. Well, I graduated. I finished my PhD, and I got a job. So I was actually making a bit of money. So my wife and I, put all of our money together. We had no clue why she was sick. She was going to ever more invasive tests every, few weeks.
Eventually the tests start taking their toll on the person, because they do get more invasive. Invasive is the key word for that.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing was, one of the symptoms that my wife had was transient anemia. So one day she would go and get her blood tested. She would be anemic. She would go back a couple weeks later. Her blood would be fine. She would go back another couple of weeks. She would be anemic again. There was all of these very bizarre symptoms that nobody could tell us what was happening. Well,
that's a precursor. That's a precursor to leukemia. My father passed away from leukemia this last year. I think I kind of lost track, to be honest. And it came down, and my mom had an air leak. She's near Aliso Canyon here in California, and she just fought leukemia. Luckily, she's clear, but it was definitely an air quality issue. So did you figure out what it was specifically?
Well, so we what helped us figure it out was that we moved. We moved about, 2 miles away from where our other house was. I had managed to save up enough money in a year that we put a down payment on a house, and we moved. And after we were at our new place for about 2 weeks, all of the skin rashes on the kids cleared up. I could breathe again. For years, I had to be on a CPAP machine. Suddenly, my sleep apnea was just gone.
Wow.
My wife had been making a snack. She'd been cutting up strawberries for the kids, and she wasn't even thinking about it. She popped a strawberry in her mouth, and she kind of came to me and she's like, Dylan, I messed up and I ate a strawberry, so I think I'm gonna be like laying in bed feeling like I'm dying for the rest of the day, because that's what would happen when she would eat something that reacted badly with her. And suddenly she was fine. We didn't know why, but something had changed, right? Well, then about 2 weeks later, while I was at work, so I work in drug design, so I design novel chemotherapeutics and anti-inflammatory drugs. That's what my job was when I got out of grad school. So I was working.
Thank you for that, by the way, because that's something that saves lives. If you're in drug manufacturing design, people aren't necessarily like, oh, is that right? What kind of opioids are you working with? And you're like, no. There's a lot of medicine out there.
Yeah, but so my wife called me and told me about an article that she had just read that our community was being exposed to a chemical called ethylene oxide.
Oh.
And I said, hang on a second, I don't know what that is, but I work in drug discovery. I'm sure somebody here knows what that is. And so I went and I asked everyone that I worked with, hey, have you ever heard of ethylene oxide? You ever heard of ethylene oxide? And I ran into a couple of people that said, oh yeah, I've heard of it. And I said, well, there's this article that just came out that our community might be being exposed. And when they went through all of the symptoms that they had seen as workers that had worked with ethylene oxide, they were all of the symptoms that my family and I had been.
Which you're not going to train a doctor, and a doctor is not going to know this sort of stuff.
Exactly.
It's not a natural. If they had a list of every chemical ailment and everything possible, you can't search it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably can now with the internet, but seriously, I could see, because it was many years ago, right, when this all happened.
Yeah. No. This was in the fall of 2018 when this happened.
Oh, okay. So this was last year. This is going on, and so this is where you get into the talk of environmental racism, because you guys had the position to move because you were in a transient position, much like her anemia, in the sense that you weren't going to be there permanently. You were in a transition point in your life, so you could leave. But many people can never get out of those places; they're stuck where they are. Yeah. I saw something interesting not too far from where you were in Kalamazoo. And in Kalamazoo, because Michigan, they got this whole master plan thing. We'll talk about this and deal, but it's they're basically like trying to get everyone living inside these superstructures. So you're like building and living and doing everything in a totally controlled environment. And so in Kalamazoo, they're buying up tons and tons of property, but they're also trying to kill off the homeless population because they have a huge homeless population. And so what they were trying to do was they offered them free housing outside of, they were at the Bronson Park at the time. I was there for that whole freedom encampment thing. And shouldn't call it a thing. It was a very powerful protest. Shouldn't diminish it at all. But the point is they were trying to move them to an area near the railroad tracks that was a known toxic waste dump. And they had dumped like coal ash or something like that, essentially moving them there would shave their life expectancy by as much as 15 to 20 years. And so this is another thing we're seeing here in California. And this is sort of a random thing, but like lately in Los Angeles, we've noticed there's bad drugs going around our community. And we've noticed an intake of more and more homeless people walking around talking to themselves. And so we see these environmental things, because drug use becomes an environmental thing at a certain point, depending on how the community operates in a metropolitan area. And so this type of control and racism, manipulation, and injustice happens on a lot of levels in different states where they use it to wipe out these lower populations or whatever. I went to Flint, right? And I will let you keep going with your story from here. When I went to Flint and we drove around with the window down, which don't do that. We drove past an a natural gas refinery, and sure enough, a big wave of gas came in the car, and the person closest to the window literally vomited. Literally had to pull over and threw up everything. And she was the person who brought me there. I was like, oh my God. And these people can't move. There's nowhere to go, especially when they redline their areas and make it impossible to get loans, make it impossible to sell their houses. They're stuck. They're trapped until they die, right? I mean, and so
exactly.
So where has this gone? And what is this chemical? What is ethylene oxide? It sounds harmless, but obviously it's not.
So ethylene oxide is actually it's a very small molecule. It has a very interesting shape. It's actually shaped like a triangle. It's 2 carbon atoms and then an oxygen atom right here, and it forms a semi-stable triangle. And it was actually discovered in Chicago, and it was first used in Chicago as a sterilizing agent. They would gas the meat in the stockyards with it because it would kill off all of the insects and all of the eggs that were hanging out on the meat. And then they'd pack it in freezers and, the refrigerated cars and send it out. And it's been used as a sterilizing agent pretty much since then. Now it's mainly used in sterilization of medical devices. That's what the one facility in our community uses it for. The other facility in our community, because this is an environmental justice community, we don't have one ethylene oxide emitting facility, we have 2. The other one uses it in chemical manufacturing because it's very good at a lot of different reactions given the way that the molecule is structured. It's actually it's used in, or it comes out of the production of ethylene, which is in everything, like polyethylene, right?
So it's a byproduct of other chemical processes.
It is a byproduct of some other chemical processes, but it's also a very good starting point. So it's very useful. You can use it to make antifreeze. You can use it to make plastics. You can use it to
I was reading about this.
Oceans and things like that. It's also, because of the way it's made, it's got that little oxygen thing, and it's a semi-stable propene. What it's got is it's basically its own fuel source and its own oxidizer.
Right, because it's 2 carbon and 1 oxygen, so it's a perfect explosion.
If you think about what does a fire need? A fire needs heat, a fire needs a fuel source, and a fire needs oxygen, right? It's got its own oxygen, it's got its own fuel source, which is the ethylene, and when it breaks apart into the oxygen and the ethylene, it creates heat, right? So it basically, it can explode and it turns into a self-sustaining decomposition reaction that moves at about Mach 6. It's used mainly in
moves at Mach 6.
Air Force. Yeah, that's the speed of the shockwave.
Right, so it's a little faster than you can see is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, it has a shock strength of for weight, it's 5 times as strong as TNT.
I mean, this is some scary stuff, and I was reading up about how it kills people. It kills people pretty horrifically, where the DoD sold it as something that renders people unconscious, and then they were like, well, it doesn't actually render people unconscious. It actually makes their lungs explode when it creates a vacuum, and they actually kind of die horrifically. Heads up, by the way, we're not going to stop using it, because this is our number 2 most powerful ordinance, and it is commonly used, right? We use this pretty commonly. Now, this is also leaving a residual chemical on anything it's used in too, right? This chemical isn't a natural occurring chemical, right? We do make it.
It is. No, it is.
It is.
It is a naturally occurring chemical. So the thing is, when organic matter decomposes, it produces ethylene, and in any production of ethylene, a small amount of ethylene oxide is produced.
Okay.
Right? We're talking teeny tiny little bit.
Is this what makes ethylene combustible in the first place, or is ethylene by itself combustible?
Ethylene by itself is very combustible.
Okay.
But ethylene oxide provides the oxygen and the heat that you would need.
Right. So it's a more sustainable sort of explosion if you put more of it together. Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's it's like I said, in warfare, it's used. Because of the nature of its shockwave, you can actually shoot one of these explosives over a minefield and actually will detonate all the mines underground because of the strength of the shockwave that it can send out.
Wow, that's really cool.
And it's also used in urban warfare because it's an extremely good bunker buster. Because of the sustained nature of the implosion and explosion, it can take down walls that conventional explosives just will not.
Yeah, so I want to make this really clear to everyone that's listening. This is just short of a nuclear weapon.
Ethylene oxide ordnance is sometimes referred to as mini nukes.
Okay, and we've heard that term. That's a term that gets used, thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
So the bunker busters, all those sort of things, they all use this. So here's my question for you. Got to go on a little paranoid jump, okay?
Okay.
This stuff is leaking into our waters. It's in the air. It's in the stuff. Is it a liquid or is it gas? It's only a gas?
It turns to a gas. Its boiling temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, just about 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, so in the wintertime, would there be more of an issue of contamination, like liquid stockpiles of it building up or something like that?
Not really. In the wintertime, it sticks around longer in the air.
Okay, because it's colder, so it's not breaking off as fast, right? Ultimately, this is an air pollution issue. This comes down to the direct poisoning of your wife and child.
Yeah, so it is it's bad if it gets into water, right? Because it spontaneously will turn to ethylene glycol or antifreeze in water, which is really bad to mix with your water because then it kills things, right? Yeah. But it's classified as a known carcinogen via the inhalation route, right?
Oh, really?
Not so potential carcinogen, a known carcinogen. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's definitely a jump up from, so like someone has sued successfully over this and has proven
No. So this is where things start to get more technical. In 2016, the EPA released a report based on 30 years of research, classifying this from a possible human carcinogen to a known human carcinogen.
And we still use it, and there's still limitations on pumping it into the air.
So here's the thing.
Because you're into the defense industry, and they get away with literal murder, so.
Yeah, well, so the thing is, when this chemical was upgraded, the EPA said, hey, this is a known carcinogen now, but there's no actual mechanism to change all of the regulations for all of these facilities when these chemicals get upgraded, right? This disconnect.
And this would take like a presidential order or congressional law or something like that.
What it would take is a regulatory or a rule change, right? Now, given our current federal my wife and myself have both been to Washington, D.C. to tell the EPA, don't roll back the regulations on this. In fact, the regulations need to be increased because now we know exactly how dangerous this stuff is. But, that's a fight that's still going on at the federal level.
And not a lot of people understand this, right? Like, this is super complicated. So most people probably think that these safety things, they're all in effect already. This is why the government, of course, takes care of it. What do you mean the government doesn't take care of this? Because education is becoming such an issue everywhere you go. It's getting harder and harder to explain this. You have the need of someone like me suddenly to make this interesting to people, which is going to piss off everybody. And so it really comes back around to, we got a real problem. We need the public to be upset, and no one even knows it's an issue.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm glad you brought up the point that, everyone thinks, oh, this is going to be taken care of, because that's what we thought too. That's what, my wife and I thought. We heard about this in the newspaper article that had come out. They said officials had been made aware these companies were taking steps to try to remedy the amount of ethylene oxide that they were emitting, right? Mm-hmm. Cut to about 3 months later, we went to a local meeting and found out that no, the companies weren't doing anything to try to abrogate these emissions. The local governments had not taken any action to try to remediate or try to address the community that was being actively poisoned at this point, and we knew was being actively poisoned, and has still not taken any action to try to make this right and try to fix this problem.
And so, but what you're basically telling me here is that, and this is not an unfamiliar story, right? You have this clear corruption going on. You have this environmental thing happening. You have two plants in the same area dumping the same chemical in the same place. So everyone's like, well, it's just in that one place, but it's still affecting those people.
Yep.
And it's still going into the air supply that we all share regardless. Not to mention the whole larger issue. I don't want to use, please.
I mean, so here's the thing, right? If it was just the ethylene oxide, that would be one thing, right? But not only do we have two ethylene oxide facilities in this town, we have a coal plant that's over 100 years old that has two, as you mentioned, coal ash ponds. We have two coal ash ponds in our community out of I think there are 12 EPA Superfund sites in all of Illinois.
Really?
5 of them are in Waukegan.
Superfund sites, by the way, just so everyone knows, are basically just giant contamination spots that, especially with the PFAS is a thing that's really everyone needs to pay attention to, which is it's basically a forever chemical that's used in waterproofing. It's used in everything. It's in your beds, in your pizza boxes. We've known it's poisonous forever. And they have these sites where they've just thrown tons and tons of waste, like Wolverine shoes, right? They make the shoes, but the entire shoe is waterproofed. The bits all just get thrown into a dump, and those become called Superfund. What do you call it? Super sites? What was the name again?
Superfund sites.
Superfund sites, yeah. It's not Superfund. It's the other thing. And it's totally a mislabeling, and these things are extremely poisonous. Yeah. And if you follow downstream from them, it's just cancer cluster.
Yeah. Well, so, speaking of cancer clusters, one of the Superfund sites in our area is where it's an asbestos factory. It's an old asbestos factory where they used to make asbestos shingles, and they shut it down. And suddenly,
which is something Trump wants to bring back, by the way, is active use of it. We still actively use asbestos for things. It is still used in stuff reasonably, but he wants it to be used like it was used in The Wizard of Oz. By the way, if you don't know this, all of the fake snow in The Wizard of Oz and the poppy scene was industrial grade asbestos.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way, but so far to go.
There, so we have an asbestos plant which renders hundreds of acres along our lakefront what we would consider prime real estate, completely undevelopable and untouchable, right?
Really? The whole lake?
300 acres of lakefront real estate.
Couldn't the city or the state make more money from the taxes that come along with having, proper lakefront than they are from the industrial waste that they're letting spew out? Or is it just a couple of people getting rich and the community suffers?
It's a couple of people getting rich. The plants close down. The people leave. They take their money. They're gone. And then we find out, oh, no, this is actually a huge problem. But then it's up to, a community that in our case is 55% Latino, 30% African American, mostly working class. We're on the hook. We're on the hook to clean up from these people that made,
so they're putting people who are suffering from the diseases that were brought there too. Keep that in mind. I mean, that's the other thing that a lot of people who are listening don't really think about. It's like when you're talking to an activist in Flint, they're dealing there are no activists in Flint anymore. There are only activists around Flint because all the ones who stayed in Flint, their brains don't work right anymore. They get angry at things they can't maintain themselves normally to the level that you need to in order to be effective, because you're back into this environmental racism and environmental injustice where you affect people's environments to the point that you basically adjust their DNA, and sometimes that kills them.
So, I mean, this comes back to, and we are set up, right? So since we are majority community color, and we live at the intersection of working class community and communities of color, our community has been redlined into the area where we are, and we are ringed and surrounded by toxic industries that are pumping chemicals that individually we know slows mental development, slows musculoskeletal development, increases cancer. 1 out of every 3 children in Waukegan has asthma or an asthma-related illness. Okay, that's 3 times higher than the national average.
And we don't
So
think about it like
we
this.
know,
That's a real quality of life issue. That's quality of life in the tank that no one thinks about. It's just a statistic. It's not a statistic. That's a person whose life is now ruined.
Exactly. And on top of that, right, we take these children that are born in this community already they've been hurt by these chemical assaults from multiple sources, and we put them in schools that have been chronically defunded over decades and decades, and we put them in schools where there's a shortage of mental health counselors, there's a shortage of nurses, but there's no shortage of police officers that are in those schools. And, and then we say, oh, well, I guess these people deserve to live in this situation. I guess we deserve to die. We deserve to be poisoned because, this is where we live.
And you're back into also the prison to pipeline conversation, which is something we did an interview with the assemblyman here in California, and he said he's endorsed Bernie recently after endorsing Kamala Harris. And we asked him, well, why did he do it? And he said, well, it comes down to the criminal justice reform. And what it really happens is that in his district in downtown LA, I can't remember where exactly it is, but it's in a very African American area. They said that they can determine how many prison beds they're going to need based on the third grade reading level. Like whatever the third graders are doing, they can set a number for how many prison beds they're going to need in 10 years. And that's like, it's not like everyone wants to say, oh, you're being paranoid. Oh, people aren't planning this stuff. No, they're just not planning it for your kids. They're not planning it for what you're doing. But trust me, there are huge communities that they're just seen as, how can we turn them into slaves again? Because you're back to the 13th or 11th? Which I can't remember which amendment it is on the top of my head. Yeah, we always talk about how important it is. I'm not the best with numbers, but that's why I'm not the PhD, well, among many reasons. It just always comes back around to this issue. I was going to make a point, but let's stick on what you were talking about here. So we have two questions. Number one, generally speaking, not what you guys actually did, but generally speaking, what can someone do? Because this problem is not limited to Illinois. It is particularly an issue in the Rust Belt states more than other places, especially in a Republican state. The South, it becomes an issue, but they don't have the
Texas.
It's different.
It's terrible in Texas.
Yeah, no, it is terrible in Texas.
And Louisiana, Texas and Louisiana are two of the worst. Well, and California. California is really bad too for this.
Yeah, we're working on it. People always think that because we're like a blue state and Democrats control everything. I'm like, but you don't understand. Like austerity practices that favor corporations are not a party line. They run whoever they can, wherever they can, and they really prey on our inactivity, our ability to say, oh, this isn't our problem, this is somebody else's issue. And so this comes back to something I said in our pre-call, which is, you guys chose to get off your asses and actually do something about it, beyond just going to say, beyond all this stuff. But before we get into that, because we're gonna, I think that's really the best conclusion for the maximum what someone can do. What can somebody do in California or Louisiana or something like that to get engaged in order to maybe have some impact on this? What can the state do? How can we change some of this?
So one of the organizations that I've become involved with since becoming an activist is the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I was in a webinar that they were putting on a few days ago, and what they said was that they've crunched the numbers. These are all very smart people. They've crunched the numbers. They've analyzed the data, and it turns out that communities like ours, environmental justice communities, are targeted by heavy industry. They're targeted by toxic industries because there is specifically low civic engagement. That means people don't vote because over and over people have tried to vote and tried to make their voices heard, and over the legislators have told them in no uncertain terms their voice does not matter.
Do you think election integrity comes into an issue? I'm sorry to interrupt you on this specific thing, but what you said to me kind of triggers on something I talk about a lot, which is that how your vote is counted and how your vote is controlled. And I feel like when you talk about targeting, I can't help but, like I've said for a long time, and I realize this, that the reason we were able to flip Virginia and all these state houses is because the vote totals were so incredibly low. And there has been this move across the country, and we've seen it since 2000. If you actually look at the statistics, Democrat voting turnout dropped to the floor after 2000 because of Florida, and everyone felt like, oh, we can't win, our votes aren't counted, yada, yada. And we've seen that decrease. And so the reason progressives are doing so well, and the reason that people should be running for office, is because they've creeped those vote totals so low that sometimes communities are voting in like 15 to 20% only. Like, it gets so low. And then it gets into this combination of, are the votes even being counted right? How do these people stay in power? How do the election officials? So I know you're not going to say this, so I'm going to say this.
Yeah.
It's really, really important that if people feel totally powerless, that they can't change their elected officials, get involved with the election process itself. Get into the office that needs volunteers where they're counted. Take over the position. If you can't flip it, that's why. And so I just want to say that before we get into it. So go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at the our last elections here, we had about 8% voter turnout.
Yeah,
so,
that's ridiculous. I mean, that's so low.
Yeah, but there's a reason for that. I mean, we have systemic disenfranchisement of people, due to felony disenfranchisement. We have systemic disenfranchisement of the poor, the Latino communities. Obviously, a lot of our Latino brothers and sisters are, quite honestly, scared to be in public spaces. I'm sure
they're targeted. I'm sure if they speak out or even voting, because all that stuff is relatively public data, they can figure out who to go after or how to target them. And how would you feel the combination of legal to, because you said there's a large people of color community, and when your totals are so low, there tends to be, I hate using the word illegal because our system is so messed up. I went through the immigration process with my wife. It's completely corrupt and wrong. But how much do you think that people are hiding out because there's people in their community who are dealing with ICE issues or whatever the thing is going on that also suppresses things to a degree?
So, like my wife, am I right? My wife's family is Guatemalan. She was born in California. She's a very outspoken activist, and when she goes to places where she's going to express a political opinion, she feels that she has to carry her passport with her at all times because she does not feel safe going out into a public space and processing and speaking out because she feels like she's going to be targeted. And honestly, there's never been law enforcement, but there are very vocal people that speak out and talk about whenever she gets up to talk about and shout out about ICE and about how she should be rounded up. And it's not an unwarranted fear for the Latino community around.
Yeah, it's not, and that's something that I think that as we're moving forward, it's going to only further oppress these voting things. Let's say you have a family member who's staying with you who isn't completely done with their legal paperwork. Your whole house might not vote. You might not get involved with the census. You might not do a ton of problems that affect how, and this is how Republicans stay in control. They use fear and intimidation, and you're seeing a lot of that. And I think that now your representative, is it a Democrat or Republican?
Democrat.
Okay, so you have a Democratic representative who is also perpetuating all these problems, right? They're basically allowing it to go on. So it's not as clear. It's not always like Republicans. It's worse with Republicans, but Democrats just as bad.
I'm glad you pointed out and that our representative is Democratic because that kind of gets to what we're talking about. If it's a Democrat, right, we're trying to encourage Democrats, but if it's a Democratic administration or a Democratic representation that we have, and this is the way people feel, they're not going to take part in civic activities because they feel, and not without basis, they feel that their voice doesn't matter. And that's really at the root of this, is that their voices are not heard, right? That's since, for example, this ethylene oxide issue, since it came out, people in our community have been speaking out, screaming about this, to the rooftops, to DC, to Texas, to California, they've been going. And over, we do these things and nothing changes. And people start to feel, once again, not without basis, that their voice doesn't matter. For example, I'm going to bring it back to this ethylene oxide thing again, right? We are a community that's plagued by ethylene oxide. Now, not too far from us, about 40 miles away, there's another community that was plagued by ethylene oxide. However, that community was very affluent and very white. And the Illinois governor, a Democrat, once again, I'm not, just to be fair here, the Illinois governor stepped in and signed an order sealing the ethylene oxide emitting facilities in that community.
So the governor can step in and make a change on this, and they obviously have chosen this community for this purpose. They basically chose all these people to die. Really horribly.
We are the ones who have to suffer so that others can live comfortably. Yes.
Oh wow, that really gave me a sense of Elysium or something, right?
Right, and that's the thing. That's why the people feel like they don't matter, is because their representatives show them over and over and over that they don't matter, that their voice doesn't matter.
And their voice does matter. That's bullshit, and it does matter, and it does. And the thing is, we have to be empowered. Well, individually, our voices don't mean a whole lot, but as a group, our voices are very powerful. And so that's really what it comes down to is how can you get people to come together as a group and have enough energy under the circumstances. Now, it seems like you guys have taken a more direct approach. I wanted to get an answer of what other people might have done first, because I know what you guys have already decided to do. And don't worry, you can tell them we're wrapping this up. We're almost done here. We're almost done. Thank you for loaning us in, by the way. Your wife has decided to take some direct action.
A fair amount of us have, yes. We've been getting involved in this. There's about 10 of us and our allies that have taken or that are trying to take precinct committee people, committee person slots in our Democratic Party. We're forming a coalition called the Lakefront Progressives that is going to in the kind of forgotten communities, the industrial and post-industrial lakefront that we occupy. But yeah, my wife has taken kind of the biggest risk, and she's actually running for state representative, and she's running on a platform of several very good things, but one of which is that she's not going to take money from these corporate polluters that surround our community and are killing us.
It's shocking that that's a thing we have to be proud of these days, but I'm really proud of her for doing that. I think that I think that you guys should talk to R.L. Miller out in California. She does Climate Hawks, and they do legislation all over the country for what's happening. And I've told her, she's progressive about some things, extremely progressive about the environment, less progressive about other things, but she is a huge asset and a great person for these sort of things. I'd like to refer you guys to each other, maybe get someone talking, because you definitely things really happening. I wanted to give you some good news. I think you could use some good news in this. Would you like some good news?
Yeah, I'd love some good news.
Well, it's more like strategy good news. It's not like I have this thing in this paper and they decided to close the plant. Yay! No, that's not happening. We're all gonna die. So so your wife is in a really good spot. Now, the reason for this is going to be the same thing I told Ocasio when I met with her in 2018. And I said, you have this community with really low vote totals that look like you. Mm-hmm. These people are going to relate to you. They're going to connect to you. They're going to see you and see themselves. And getting out there and engaging these people and that personal connection and low vote totals give you this opportunity to win an election. You don't get that opportunity in a lot of places. We see a lot of progressives banging on the front door with their giant thing to knock down and that's just not how it works. You have to come in, you got to make the personal connection, you got to be sneaky, you got to have a good purpose. And it sounds like your wife has all the pieces. I assume she's a people person enough to get out and talk to people. Yeah. So if she can do that, and this is for every progressive who wants to run for office, look for that thing, low vote total, a need like your air quality issue, something to run on specifically, not taking money from these specific groups. And then suddenly you can win a seat and really change your community. How much do you think it would change your community to see the representation change with someone that they knew?
Well, I mean, I think it would change a lot, honestly. through our activism, you know, we're very involved with labor groups. We're very involved with housing security groups. We're very involved with environmental activism, you know, for obvious reasons. And we're very involved with immigration issues it's our community, right? These are all
everyone
issues.
in the community. It's got to be everyone or no one.
Yeah.
You can't have this attitude of like pick and choose with reform.
Yeah, we cannot afford to be a splintered community. We have to come together. And the thing is, all of these injustices, there are very good organizations fighting each of these individual injustices. But, you know, kind of one of the things that we've been talking about is that all of these injustices, they all intersect.
Right. It's all one giant
deal with
injustice.
Maybe you can tamp this one down and then this one will come up. But you have to come together as a community and push against them together, you know,
Right.
because all of them are involved with each other. You know, you can't have racial justice without economic justice. You can't have economic justice without housing justice. You can't have housing justice without environmental justice, and you can't have environmental justice without racial justice. They're all connected.
It's a giant intertwining fuck show. Sorry. That was my one F-bomb of the show at the end. I'm trying to limit myself to one a show. Wow. Okay. I think I said one accidentally in the midst of your story. It's like, oh Jesus fuck. This has been enlightening and terrible. I've you know, great interview. You know, I'd like to hear more about how this story develops. Is there anything that we didn't hit on? Is there any part of this story that you feel like our viewers should know what's going on? Because I feel like we're getting to that length now where people start going, what's on the other channels?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's always more, you know, the more you scratch the surface, the more you find. But I mean, this is where we're at right now. And
do you have a website or anything you can plug so that people can like follow what you're doing?
Yeah. So my wife's website for her election, that's electburdette.com. That's spelled Burdette. So I'm a volunteer scientist with Clean Power Lake County, so you can check out cleanpowerlakecounty.org.
Which you'll find those articles, by the way, if you're want to learn more about the ethylene oxide on cleanpowerlakecounty.org. That's ETHYLENEOXIDE. I have a feeling if you Google cleanpowerlakecounty.org and ethylene oxide together, you will find everything you need, because that's what I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's anything else?
Yeah, no, you are great. I'm really sorry your family went through that. I'd really like to hear more. I wish her the best of luck with her campaign.
So the mobilization is all coming from local municipalities. The mayors are coming together. The Lake County health department is coming together. That's all happening locally, but nothing is being done by the EPA or the Illinois EPA. They are absolutely doing zero for us.
At least right now.
Right now, exactly. Hopefully we're trying to push and get it out because the communities aren't aware of it.
Why do you think they're not aware of it?
We're 72.7% people of color. Our poverty level is higher than national average. And these are all the fence line communities. Park City, North Chicago, high percentage in people of color and high percentage in poverty level and below.